everybody is just scrambling for every last dollar, and people can't retire because they don't know if their savings are how long their savings will last because they're going to be debased.
What should be the appropriate Bitcoin allocation?
Yeah. The Bitcoin price is roughly at 100K.
Right.
I think a lot of people were anticipating it for it to be a lot higher by now.
Yeah,
People are talking about diminishing returns. They're saying the cycles. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, it's doing just what it should be doing. The next stop is at 140. People ask me, what do you think the best thing about Bitcoin is? I say the best thing about Bitcoin is that it might end wars.
That's very powerful. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Hello, we're here in Miami Beach with the one, the only, legendary Larry Lepard. Larry, congratulations on your new book, The Big Print.
Thank you.
What happened to America and how sound money will fix it. What I said last time we were speaking about this is what impressed me is how fast you wrote this book. We ran into each other at Nashville conference and we were just having a conversation. I said, Nico, I'm thinking about writing a book. And 3 or 4 months later, here we go. What inspired you? What motivated you to do that?
A little more than that. So the genesis of this was looking at a TV program with my wife in the spring and watching the blue team argue with the red team and getting incredibly mad and frustrated that nobody was talking about the core issue, right? And I hate all politicians except a few libertarians like Ron Paul. And what I thought was, they're just not talking about how to really drain the swamp. And the problems the country faces, in my opinion, are all driven by the unsound money, not all the other stuff. The other stuff is their problems for sure, but that's not the core issue. And I thought, nobody's really explained it well. And then I thought, well, no, people have. I mean, Safe's book is fantastic. Lynn's book is fantastic. Jeff's book is fantastic. But you know what? I give those to people and people bog down. They seem to be a little textbooky. And unless you're really deep into Bitcoin and this stuff, you can get lost in them. And so I thought somebody ought to try and write a book that's really easily understandable by any person with no financial background, just a common American. And they know one thing for sure. They know they're getting screwed by inflation. Everyone in the world understands that today. They go to the grocery store and they say, what's wrong? But they don't really understand why. And a lot of times they're being gaslit by these people who are saying, well, it's the greedy corporations. And it's not the greedy corporations, it's the Fed. And so I thought, I've been in this area a long time, pre-Bitcoin, was a sound money guy with gold. And I'm probably kind of uniquely suited to maybe tell the whole story from the beginning. And so I wrote a book that I hope, my fondest wish for this book, Nico, is I want to orange pill the world. So I just decided I'm going to try and write a book that's easy to understand, but lays it out so that a common person will go, oh my goodness, I now understand why I'm getting screwed. And that's the bad news. The good news is I now understand what I can do about it. And so as you know from the book, it's in 2 parts. Part 1 is the problem. Part 2 is the solution.
Absolutely. And one of the things too, Larry, that really impacted me is most of society is still asleep.
Yes.
To the idea or to the problem. They don't understand that money can exist without inflation.
Yes.
And they continue to seek a political solution.
Yes.
Where the solution is not a political one. It's fixing the money itself.
It's related to politics because the Fed controls the money and we've got to end the Fed, but you're correct. And I noticed that in a lot of younger people, people just think, well, inflation, we always have had inflation. We'll always have inflation. It's a bad thing. We've just got to learn to live with it. And I'm here to say, no, you don't. I was around in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We had a lot of inflation in the 70s, but I remember what the country was like before we got as financialized and as broken as we are today. And so, again, you asked me what motivated me. Part of what motivated me was somebody's got to explain to everybody who's young now that it wasn't always this messed up, that there was actually a time when America had other problems, but this wasn't one of them. If you think about the America that existed post-World War II, we were a great country. We had won the war. We were, widely admired. We didn't enter into any new wars for a while. We mess around in Korea, and then Vietnam came later. But for quite some, and inflation wasn't a problem in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Early 70s. And then, of course, the big event that started the whole downhill roll in terms of this problem was Nixon going off the gold standard in 71. And one of my favorite charts in the book is on page 22, where I show the history of inflation since the founding of the country and then what happened in 71. And of course, it's just a hockey stick, right? We went off the gold standard and inflation suddenly became a serious problem. And we really haven't solved it since that time.
Absolutely. One of the things too in the book that really stuck out to me, you sent me a PDF version early on, said that the founders themselves, the founders of the US, they saw it as a form of counterfeiting. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in fact, there was even a law, and it's in the book, it talks about this. There was a law that said anybody who debased and counterfeited the currency would be punishable by death. And Edwin Griffin, in his book, The Creature from Jekyll Hyde, said, well, if we applied that law today, the Senate, the Congress, the Treasury Department, and the President would all have to be executed. And I just thought that was a great quote. But yes, I mean, they put it in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, where they said only gold and silver, sound money, can be currency. And of course, that's based on, they did that based on what happened when the first monetary default occurred. When we fought the Revolutionary War, they printed something called the Continental, and of course, the Continental hyperinflated. So they were very much aware of this problem. And the book talks about that entire history. And it's interesting, our forefathers understood this. And to be frank with you, the authors of the Bible understood this. I mean, they talk about honest weights and measures, and dishonest weights and measures are an abomination to God. I mean, monetary tomfoolery, it's been going on for a long time. And the people who can control the monetary system, they can make themselves fabulously rich. And that's what's happened.
And I think that mechanism is poorly misunderstood.
Yes, totally.
There was a quote, you were quoting Rothschild, I believe. It says,
Yeah.
"Give me control of the nation's money supply, and I care not who makes the laws."
Exactly.
Could you explain, Larry, and let's make this an educational thing,
Sure.
right? And people are, I'm assuming a lot of people are going to watch this one. What is the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, sure. So the Federal Reserve got created in 1913, and it is the body in the United States that controls the supply of money. It's our monetary authority. It's a private corporation. It's actually owned by the member banks. But it's a funny beast. It's kind of private and public because it was created by Congress, and Congress theoretically oversees it. I mean, if Congress decided tomorrow to vote to end the Federal Reserve, they could. But of course, the Congress is wined and dined by the Fed, and the Fed has convinced Congress that they're absolutely essential to the well-being of the country, which I would argue they're not. But the Federal Reserve controls the money supply through the issuance of currency, and they were theoretically formed in order to balance out, swings in inflation and deflation and so on and so forth. And those were occurring pre-Federal Reserve. But frankly, they weren't as severe or as big as what happened after the Fed got created. So the Fed got created in 1913. We immediately went into World War I. They immediately violated their charter, and they started printing money to finance World War I. And between 1916 and 1920, the price level in the country doubled. Okay, so huge inflation based on paying for the war. And, that created a lot of societal problems. We had the Ku Klux Klan came back big time. We had all kinds of race riots in a number of major cities. We had enormous labor strikes, et cetera. I mean, imagine, you're a worker in 1916 and you're making a certain wage, and then, basically 6 years later, everything costs twice as much, and your wages haven't kept up with it, which is kind of what's going on now, right? And so the Fed is this body that controls the issuance of the money supply. And as Milton Friedman said, money is always a monetary phenomenon. So a society, produces goods and services. Doctors provide a service, people make widgets, those are goods. And the dollars that we have are they are claims against the goods and services, and the price we pay for them balances the claims against what's provided. If you suddenly decide you're going to double the amount of dollars in existence, which is what happened in World War II, the price of everything doubles because the same number of people, you didn't double the number of goods and services, you just double the number of dollars, and so the price goes up. And this has been the continual and recurring pattern, Nico, that basically the federal government has caused average American people to suffer because anytime the banks get in trouble, and the Fed was created to backstop the banks, it was a cartel of the banks, really. Anytime the banks got in trouble, the Fed prints the money to bail them out. And it looks like, that's what they should do and what they must do, although I talk about the alternatives. And in fact, what it does is it increases the cost of gasoline, it increases the cost of food. So more or less, we all pay for the Fed's mistakes and for the bank's mistakes. And it's terribly inefficient, and it's terribly unfair because the bankers and the wealthy people, there are wealthy people in this country, who are smart, and they actually know how to make inflation work for them. And we call them quintillionaires, and that's whole other thing we could define. But the bottom line is, smart people know how to borrow money cheap and buy assets that pay more. And so with inflation, they actually get richer. Whereas people who are working for a fixed wage, their wages don't go up as fast, and they actually get poorer. And it's very, very unfair. And America was built on the concept and the promise of fairness. And it's being violated. And it's been violated for a long time. And I think what we're coming to a head is it's now getting to be so bad and so obvious that I think the book is timely. That you know what I mean? That I think a lot of people are going to read it and go, oh my God, you're right. We got to fix this.
Yes.
You know? And that's the goal.
And we're on the verge of what I would call the Great Awakening. I think we're on the
that's right.
verge of people really waking up. And I think, some signs of that was this recent election with Trump.
Right.
What just happened.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, exactly. The complete rebuttal of the legacy media. And then now we're finding out that it was USAID that was funding that whole apparatus.
It's unbelievable. We've been gaslit and lied to consistently. And the book talks about what a beautiful thing the internet is, because the internet is what has allowed you and me to speak like this and communicate with thousands and millions of people around the world. It's what's allowed Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan to become more important than CNN. And people, the scales are falling away from their eyes, and they're coming to realize, hey, you know what? I've been lied to and I've been screwed. And the good news is we outnumber, the people who control this system, the elites in the media, the elites in the government, all the people who run the system the way they run it, that takes advantage of the average man. We outnumber them vastly. Where they've had the advantage of having all the information and control of all these systems. But guess what? We're taking that advantage away.
100%. The systems are falling apart. I call it the great disintermediation.
Exactly.
And the internet really allowed mass scale peer-to-peer communication.
We've been saved by technology, as Jeff Booth says. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. My view is it'll happen without Larry or without Nico, but I've got a limited window here, at age 67. I want it to happen faster, right? I want to see it happen. Therefore, I wrote the book.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like, let's accelerate this, right?
We all contribute in what I call this narrative trench warfare on the battlegrounds of the internet.
That's exactly right.
I want to ask you something, Larry, because this goes down a deeper rabbit hole.
Sure.
The Federal Reserve was established in 1913.
Yes.
The income tax was also established in 1913.
Right.
Is that a coincidence?
I don't think so. I mean, and the federal government exists to protect itself. And there's some great charts, and it's fabulous to see Trump and Besant saying 1870 to 1913 was a really prosperous period. And they're right, because we were on a sound money standard, the soundest money at that time, which was gold. And if you go back and you look at the revenues, this country didn't have an income tax pre-1930. This wasn't a bad country from 1789 to 1913. It was a pretty good country. Where did all the revenue come for the federal government? From tariffs. So, people say, hey, Trump is tariff man. Well, it might actually make a lot of sense.
Let me ask you something, Larry, and you were alluding to this earlier. Did the establishment of the Federal Reserve in the United States enable World War I and World War II?
I think so. I mean, look, World War II was a different case, a little more existential, some bad stuff going on. But yes, I think that these printing money has been used, and the book shows this, printing money has been used to pay for wars since the War of 1812. I mean, the suspended specie redemption in 1812 to pay for that war. The bottom line is war is incredibly expensive. Nobody wants to pay for it. So what are you going to do if you're a government? You're going to come to your citizens and say, hey, we're going to tax you at 100% to pay for this war? Citizens are going to go, yeah, like hell you are. We're going to revolt. So they know they can't do that. But if they have a sneaky mechanism to tax you indirectly, which is basically what inflation is, well, then they can pay for the war, right? And that's what they've done. And that, in my view, that's actually one of the most positive things. People ask me, what do you think the best thing about Bitcoin is? I'd say the best thing about Bitcoin is that it might end wars. I mean, and that would be wonderful, right?
The reason I asked you that question is it's such a powerful statement. And I believe it was Ron Paul who originally said, it's not a coincidence that the century of course it is. It's not a coincidence that the century of central banking is the bloodiest century in human history.
It's in the book. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So let me ask you something. What is your take on, because I think from a historical context, right? Initially you had Trump going in 2016.
Right.
And he was the outsider candidate.
Correct.
And then they did everything in their power to stop this guy.
Absolutely.
The lawfare, the assassination, that election was quite interesting in 2020, to put it nicely.
Yes.
Where are we in a historical perspective? Because I know that you are a big fan in the fourth turning theory.
Yes.
So where are we?
Well, I think we're deep into it now. I mean, if the fourth turning theory, for those who don't know, is the theory that every 80 years you have a crisis that gets resolved with a change of the rules. The last one before this was the Depression, World War II. Before that, it was 1865, the Civil War. Before that, it was 1776. Those were all fourth turnings. We're in another one. It's 80 plus years from World War II right now. And I think what's going to get resolved here is what Robert Breedlove says, does, which is we're going to determine what money is. If you look at these forth earnings, they tend to last between 10 and 30 years. And if you look at this one, I marked the start of this one as 2008. So we're more than 10 years into it. We're coming up on, at 2028, we'll be 20 years into it. So we're going to resolve this money issue, in my opinion, in the next 10 or 15 years, maybe sooner.
And where do you think Trump fits in all this?
Oh, he's a godsend in terms of, being a disruptor, right? I mean, he's had the courage. I mean, thank God he wasn't killed. I mean, it was almost divine that bullet didn't hit his head. He turned his head at the right time. And he's a disruptor of the system. And honestly, he's not perfect, but he's learning and growing. I mean, I sure like Trump 2.0 more than I like Trump 1.0. He's getting more intelligent people around him. I mean, some of the people on his team I love. I love Tulsi Gabbard. I love RFK Jr. He threw out Pompeo, who was a neocon. I think Trump 1.0, he didn't really fully understand what he was up against. And, although he might have won the 2020 election, in a certain sense, it's poetic that he didn't. The other side did. They totally misplayed their hand and made things much, much worse. And as a result, he was able to regroup his forces and get a better team around him. And I'm extremely hopeful for what he can do here. Now, having said that, nobody's perfect, right? I mean, when I saw, and I just have to say this, because for the record, when I saw Melania coin and Trump coin, I was like, oh man, come on, dude. You're not selling steak knives with a Trump name on them, are you?
The timing of it could have been better. Yeah. 3 days before the inauguration. But I think
look, I forgive him that, but it just wasn't great in my view.
No, it definitely wasn't. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners are getting their first taste in politics.
Yeah.
Which is like, politics is the definition of the organization of power.
And
there's a lot of concessions.
And there's compromise. I mean, look, right. we've dragged along all these crypto guys, right? I mean, we've got some crypto guys hanging out in the strategic reserve. It should be a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but the crypto guys want a seat at the table. And I'm not wild about that, but hey, they provided a lot of votes and a lot of support, and they helped get him elected. And so, okay, if they're going to get a seat at the table, fine. I mean, I think most of the other crypto is going to fail and go away. So it doesn't really matter. What I think is most important here is that Bitcoin is in the game. They understand what it is. We got the Loomis bill that might have a chance of passing. They're clearly going to hang on to the 200,000 coins they have, and hopefully they're going to stack more.
Absolutely. And one of the things also that stuck out to me through this whole very historical occurrence is that if they just, and you were saying it earlier, if they just let Trump take a second term, right? I don't think that would have created this mobilization of our industry to throw our hat in the ring into politics.
That may be true.
Bitcoiners didn't want to get into this. We were forced into this because of Operation Choke Point 2.0 and all the hostility because of the Biden administration. I think Trump and the Republican Party saw that as an opportunity to get votes, and they jumped on it.
And it was great. It worked. Look, we'll ride that. It's good. It works. Yeah.
But it's almost as if it was divine, the whole thing. Right?
It really is.
You're looking at this, and then the way he moved his head, like you said, like.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I'm a little spiritual, and I got to tell you, when I thought about writing this book, I feel like I got tapped on the shoulder. It was kind of like, hey, you know what? You should write this. Look, this is probably going to be my 15 minutes of fame, right? I think this book might go viral, and if it does, I'm going to thank my lucky stars, and more importantly, thank what it'll do, what I think it could do for the country. And I was just very well positioned. I mean, I've been suffering with the sound money thing for a long damn time. I think you and I have had this conversation before where, being a gold bug was no fun for the last 30 years. Yeah. And then all you guys came along and it's like, holy shit, the reinforcements are here. I'm fired up.
This movement is alive and well.
It's alive and well. I mean, when I had 30-year-olds quoting von Mises to me and they'd read the Bitcoin Standard, I was like, all right, this is good. I mean, we might actually end up winning here, right? I got Marty telling me we're going to win, and I'm like,
oh, we're going to win.
Yeah, exactly. Win. I mean, it's obvious. Yeah. We are going to win, right?
Yeah.
So it's good. It's good stuff.
What do you think about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the implications of it?
It's huge. I mean, it's nation state because it could lead to nation state FOMO. I mean, as an example, I was at MENA. I saw Eric speak. I saw Manafort speak, and I heard from the Bitcoin Policy Institute guys that basically other states are watching what we're doing. That the Saudis, Oman, and the UAE are all stacking, and they were literally saying, "Are you guys okay with us announcing this?" And the response from the Trump administration is, "Sure, after we do." We just want to go first. And so if the U.S. is stacking coins, that becomes a strategic imperative for all of the countries to consider. I mean, you now know that China has to think about it.
For sure.
Russia has to think about it. China's pretty averse to it. I think Russia's smart enough. I mean, I think Putin gets it. I think they're probably stacking coins. It is the most, it's what Saylor says, is the most pristine form of capital in the world. And it's destined to become the base layer of money, in my opinion, because of its technical superiority. And as a result of that, it's a complete first mover game. I mean, you get it at the price you deserve. And so the sooner you figure it out and get it, the better off you are. And Max is better off than I am because he figured it out at $1. Trace is better off than he is because Trace figured it out at 50 cents. Like, take a guy like Larry Fink, right? I mean, a fiat guy, but smart enough to study it and realize, you know what? I either got to get on board this and figure out a way to make money doing it, sponsoring an ETF, or I'm going to end up like the Vanguard guy and lose my job.
Yep.
And so, and that's kind of how it is for everybody. A lot of people I deal with now kind of come back and they say, well, yeah, that's great, Larry, but you bought it a lot cheaper. And how can I pay this amount of money, 100,000 a coin, for something you bought for 400 or 10,000? I bought a lot at 50. But my response is, here's the paradigm. It's a critical state problem. The monetary system is the Titanic, and I got a lifeboat. I'm on the I paid 400, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 for my lifeboat seats. Here it is to you. You got to pay 100,000. Do you want a seat or not? And if I'm right, and if the system does fail, which I think it might, you're going to be damn glad you bought a seat, even if you have to pay 100,000 for it.
Of course. I mean, it's I remember Jack Mahler's the way that he said it. It's like basically saying the year is 2025 and you refuse to use the internet.
Right.
It's
right. Or Manhattan real estate. As Saylor uses. And
the whole concept of, I'm not going to buy because this person bought earlier than me. That's an ego test more than anything.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Well, and also, as I say, the critical state thing is important because once, there's some good charts in here that show adoption curves, and cell phones, all kinds of things. So this is a new technology. It's being adopted. We're entering the steep part of the curve. And so do you want to be an early adopter or do you want to wait? Because the difference is going to cost you a lot in terms of price. It's a critical state issue because another analogy I like to use is the avalanche analogy. At some point, fiat currency is going to fail, in my belief, in my opinion. So which snowflake is going to cause the avalanche to break loose and have it fail? I don't know. But there's no do-over. You know what I mean? You don't get to say, oh, I'm sorry. I kind of wish I'd gotten out of the way before that avalanche, broke loose and came down and smothered me.
What does that look like, Larry? Like when fiat fails? Because I feel like that is ugly.
It is ugly. It is ugly.
I'm assuming you've heard of the book Mandibles.
It's in the book.
Right? There we go.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, I hope so. It looks a lot of different ways, Nico, and it doesn't.
And what makes you so confident it's going to happen?
Well, I'm confident it's going to happen because of the math and because this is a superior technology and because more and more humans are adopting it, and people always gravitate towards the best solution. And we've now got 15 years of evidence that it's the best, 16 years of evidence that it's the best solution. But in terms of the how it happens, it doesn't have to be Mandibles. I don't think it will be. It'll take a bit longer. It can be more gradual, which is in a funny way, we want it to go up faster, but in a funny way, it's a good thing. If we get more people on board, give more people time to adapt. The second thing is, as I talk about in the book, this doesn't have to be a brutal, total collapse. We can do a currency reset, okay? Mm-hmm. This has been done before. Roosevelt did it in 1933. I mean, we can basically transition back to a sound money currency. The problem with America today is that the money is unsound and the money is broken, title of Lynn's book. And therefore, the solution is to just go back to a sound money system. And there have been lots and lots of societies throughout the world that have had broken money. And what happens, what you see when you study them and read about them, is when they go back to sound money, they get better. Everything gets fixed, especially if we don't have a major war. If we can avoid having a major war, I mean, all that's broken here is the money. And so, now don't get me wrong. When I'm describing occurs, there will be winners and losers. The people who don't have sound money will lose on a relative basis. The people who have a lot of unsound money stored in bonds, they're going to get creamed. They're just going to, but that's unavoidable. I mean, that's just the way that, because the bonds and the commitments that have been made, they're not money good. They're not, the values are fake. I mean, just like in real estate right now, I think some of these very high-end real estate prices, they're just fake. Yeah. I mean, people are hiding in real estate thinking that'll protect them from inflation. But, do you really need a $20 million house or a $10 million house or a $5 million house?
It's ridiculous.
It's shelter.
It's ridiculous.
It's shelter.
And it's really stolen my generation's ability to buy
that's
home.
Right.
It's been
that's
just
exactly
complete, flat-out theft.
Yes.
And the frustration, I have friends who are extremely successful and they're renting.
Right. My kids are all in their 20s and they're like, Dad, how am I ever going to buy a house?
Yeah.
You know, right?
And it's absurd. And then that leads me to the premise of your book, which is money printing breaks everything.
Yes.
How does it?
Well, it creates inflation, and inflation creates winners and losers, and it makes wealth inequality really large. One of the early charts in the book shows how just out of balance the wealth inequality has gotten. And again, when I wrote the book, I thought to myself, I got to write this because I remember America in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when I was growing up. And we had problems. I mean, the Vietnam War was a big one, but it was a better America. There was a vibrant middle class. I mean, one guy could work, his wife could be a housewife. He could have a car, they could take vacations. I mean, it was just better. And now, you know, everybody is just scrambling for every last dollar, and people can't retire because they don't know if their savings are how long their savings will last because they're gonna be debased, you know? I mean, think of all the people who worked their entire life up until 2020, saved up all their money, and then in 2 years, 40% of the money supply got printed. We just took away 40% of their labor that they'd saved for their whole life. You know, it's criminal. I mean, you think of all the people who worked for companies who had pensions, you know, and the pensions got taken over by PE firms. And then the PE firms, you know, paid out big dividends, or the companies got taken over by PE firms. I talk about this in the book. PE firms paid out big dividends, and the people's pensions got cut. I mean, America has become an enormous criminal money grab by the people who are at the top, the rich, and the laws are written to favor them and protect them. And so when anything goes wrong, they get bailed out. Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, Bill Ackman cries like a baby, you know, that the banking system will fail because he probably had deposits at Silicon Valley Bank. And so we bail it out, which is in direct contravention of the Dodd-Frank law. And that happens over and over and over again. And I document the cases in the book. I mean, it's just unfair. I mean, we used to have usury laws. When I was young, my parents would get credit cards. The maximum interest rate on a credit card was 10 or 20%. The average interest rate on a credit card is 25%. I mean, the mob would blush. So if you're rich, you can borrow money at the Fed funds rate or sometimes below, but close to the Fed funds rate. If you're average, if you're a normal American, you got to pay 25% to borrow money from the credit cards. I mean, come on.
No,
it's just, you know, come on. I mean, it's just right.
No, I mean, no, I mean, of course. I mean, I feel my generation feels it. We
Right.
feel it.
We all feel it.
But my question though is like, why don't people see the problem? Because you see a lot of politicians, and I don't want to name which side, and I think it's obvious, but a lot of politicians are saying it's the corporations.
Greedy corporations.
They're price gouging.
Yeah.
You know, they're taking advantage of the situation, this and this and that. Why isn't the average Joe aware of this? And I know writing this book and what we do every single day on Bitcoin X.
I think they kind of are. I mean, I think they're getting closer, and they're more average Joes that are becoming like us. So, you know, the Overton window is moving, and it's shifting, and there are more average Joes in our camp. But you know, it's sophisticated, right? I mean, and a lot of people, they think, well, gee, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe it's my fault. You know, this is why you have all these deaths of despair, why you have drug overdoses and alcoholism and suicides. I mean, because the game is unfair. People know it's unfair, and they give up. You're poor and you're working 3 jobs just to kind of keep your head above water and, you know, keep food on the table and, you know, right? Do you have time to read books like this? Or to go, you know, and even if you read it, you know it's the problem. Do you really have time to write your congressman or go lobby the Fed? No. I mean, you're just trying to stay alive, right? Yeah. But, you know, you vote, and, you know, we get more politicians that understand this is the issue. You know, we get a Bitcoiner politician running for president. I mean, we kind of had one. I mean, Trump got pretty close to being full Bitcoiner, a libertarian. But we get it so that there's a lot more of that fighting against the people who want to see it the other way. And guess what? We're gonna gravitate and move towards a sound money standard, and hopefully do it in a controlled and intelligent way so that people don't suffer, so that we don't have a mandibles kind of outcome.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up the Overton window. The Overton window has shifted in the last 6 months more than it has in the last decade.
Right. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, pre-January and the ETFs, I had everybody and the brother telling me, oh yeah, that's a great dream, Larry, and I understand it. And you may be right about all this, but the government's never going to allow that. Well, then they allowed the ETF. I was blown away. I didn't think the ETF was going to get through.
Yeah.
Right?
But Larry Fink has a lot of influence.
Well, that's the point, right? Yeah. See, some people with money got involved, and, you know, I mean, this is what's going on in the gold market right now. I mean, I think the smart people are buying gold now. They know, look, anybody with a brain that analyzes the macroeconomics of the federal government and realizes what a debt doom loop we're in must come to the conclusion that you have to have sound money or real assets or you're going to get hurt. I mean, Ray Dalio, one of the great investors of our time, runs Bridgewater. You know, he understands it. He's been talking about gold for years, and he's finally becoming a Bitcoiner. He's kind of coming to get it. And everybody will come to get it eventually because it's obvious. It's obvious and it's compelling.
I noticed that about Ray. I saw
Right?
I saw the news on Next.
Guys, I want to tell you about our sponsor, BitcoinWell.com. It's the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. What makes Bitcoin Well different is that it's a completely non-custodial platform, which means as soon as you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well and the funds clear, they go straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. Enable your independence today with the fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin in Canada and the United States. Head over to bitcoinwell.com to get started.
I do want to ask you about the debt doom loop. I want to
Okay,
double
yeah.
back to that. But before I get to that, I want to get your thoughts on the recent news of Elon supposedly tapping on Ron Paul to audit the Federal Reserve.
God, I love that. Yeah, I mean, Elon's nuts, but I like some of what he's doing. And wouldn't that be great? But here's the problem. You know, Elon doesn't control the Congress, and only the Congress can audit the Federal Reserve. And I'd love to have Ron Paul look at the Federal Reserve. You can bet your bottom dollar, Nico, that there is no way in hell the Fed is going to let them look at anything without a congressional act forcing it to occur. I mean, you know, Elon could say, "Hey, Ron, come on in and look at the Fed." The Fed's going to say, "F you." You know?
Did you see Jay Powell's response
I did not.
when Trump was when they asked him, like, do you think Trump's going to fire you? And he says he can't fire me. Did you see his response?
I didn't see that, but I heard that. Yeah, I heard about it. Yeah. Arrogance,
What
blatant arrogance.
is this not a government agency?
It is. Well, what he's relying on is the law, and the law says that only the Congress can fire him. And yeah, it is. That is the law. That's technically the law. So you know, and I mean, here's the thing. It's going to be really hard to get a Congress to vote to fire him. I mean, you know, Loomis and some, you know, there are people in Congress who would fire him, but there aren't enough of them. You know, just to give you an example, a good anecdote from the book, Judy Shelton is a gold person, and she's been around for a long time. She's got a PhD. She's very well known. And she advocates for going back to a gold standard. Ron Paul we all know her. She's a lovely lady. And in the first Trump administration, Trump recommended that she become a member of the Federal Reserve. You should have seen the reaction. Oh my God. There was a letter with like 130 signatories from the Congress, the Senate, and major economists saying, you know, that her views were ill-timed, dangerous, and ill-considered.
Danger to democracy is my favorite
Yes,
use.
right, exactly. And I mean, this is a woman who just said nothing more than, I want the money to be sound, I want savers not to get ripped off. And she's dangerous. So we got a ways to go before Congress is going to let anyone audit the Federal Reserve.
I believe it was a Breitbart quote, but it was basically along the lines of politics is downstream from culture.
Yeah.
So the way that we really shift the Overton window, the way that we really get Congress on our side is to win over the culture. And how do we do that? One book at a time,
Right.
One X post at a time, one video at a time,
Exactly.
really winning over the hearts and minds of individuals.
Exactly.
One of the things too, Larry, that I found in your book that I found quite interesting that perhaps people are not aware of. I would say that money printing and this fiat system that we have today gives capitalism a bad name.
Oh, absolutely.
And what you describe is that we don't live in a free market society. We don't live in a capitalistic society. We live in a Keynesian state capitalistic society, also known as crony capitalism. Could you describe what that is?
Yeah, sure. So the insiders in the system have an enormous advantage in two respects. One, we grant them cheap access to capital from the Fed, and two, we backstop their mistakes. It's just that simple. So that a Ken Griffin, you know, can put on the basis trade on the S&P 500, and when his trade is tits up in March of 2020, which it probably was, Ben Bernanke, who is corrupt and is an advisor to Ken Griffin, the rumor is he gets paid $20 million a year, can make a call to Jay Powell and say, you got to give a swap line to Citadel, or else Citadel's going to go BK. And if Citadel goes BK, the whole system will come down. And that's always been their defense, okay? I mean, Silicon Valley Bank failed.
Too big to fail.
Too big to fail, therefore we have to print the money, and printing the money bails out the bad actors. So the banks, the backstopping the banks, which is what we originally did in 1913, basically said, you guys don't have to play by the rules. You can have tails, you know, heads you win, tails we lose. And so in whatever event they do, they're going to get bailed out. And so that's crony capitalism. I mean, Warren Buffett backed Salomon Brothers and Goldman Sachs in the GFC when he knew it was bankrupt. Everybody knew it was bankrupt, but he put in preferred stock with great conversion terms and everything else at the same time, knowing the government would bail it out. And then it got bailed out, and of course he made a killing on it. There's a story in the book that's one of my favorite stories, and people are amazed when they read this. And that's, again, something I bring because I've been around for a long time and I watched all this go down. The chairman of Morgan Stanley's wife was able to borrow during the GFC, and Matt Taibbi, it's not just me saying this, Google Matt Taibbi, Real Housewives of Wall Street, okay, Rolling Stone. And it used to be under behind a firewall or a paywall. It's not. You can get it for free now. It's an amazing story. John Mack's wife borrowed $220 million from the Fed, non-recourse at 0% interest rates to buy troubled assets. So what does that mean? That means they gave her $220 million of purchasing power where she could buy distressed assets in early 2009. And if they went up in value, she would get to keep the profits. And if they went down in value and the loan defaulted, the Fed would eat it. So, that's crony capitalism. It's nice to be John Mack's wife. Okay, it's nice to be the chairman of Morgan Stanley and get that kind of a deal. You can't get that deal. I can't get that deal, but the people at the top can get that deal. This is incredibly, incredibly broken. It's financial criminal behavior.
And it makes sense why you're telling me this, and just having all these thoughts
like
going
head
through my
spins,
mind,
right? It's
a
amazing.
million miles. No, it makes sense why they resisted Trump as much as they did.
Of course they did. He's a threat to their system. He knows all this. And he wants to shut it down. I know all this. Lots of people. Ron Paul knows this. So lots of people know this. And what they've done to date, and I'll let you finish. Ask the question. What they've done to date is they've thrown us into the conspiracy nut basket.
It's not working so much anymore.
Oh no, it's not. Yeah, because the conspiracy shit's coming true. But I've been called a tinfoil hatter, all that stuff. But guess what? It's turning out that we're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Larry, I just want everyone to understand, what is the unintended consequences of specific people getting specific deals like you just mentioned? Like, what is the unintended consequence of her essentially receiving free money, because that's the way I'm interpreting it?
Right, it is. Well, that free money, one, adds to inflation. Okay. Two, makes her rich versus everybody else. Mm-hmm. And that inflation is why we all pay more for food and gasoline. Okay. And that's really, but it's subtle because it's spread out over millions of people. Yeah. So it's hard to say, well, Jilly Mack's deal cost Nico this amount of dollars. Yeah. But the pattern is there, and this is the book lays that pattern out over and over again.
It's insidious because the number on that $100 bill does not change. Right. And you're looking at your account. The number is not changing. No, it's the purchasing.
It's what it'll buy.
Yes.
Yes. It's
very sinister.
That's why eggs are $11, a dozen now or something. Yeah. There are other issues with that with bird food, but it is very sinister, and it's gotten worse. Yeah. There's a great chart in the book that shows the wealth inequality. 1% of the country owns 92% of the wealth right now.
That's crazy.
1%. So it's nice to be the rich in this country, and they live like kings. But guess what? They've done that at the expense of everybody else. So, sadly, I understand the complaints of a Bernie Sanders. I understand them. It is an unfair system. He's right. His solution is just wrong. Yeah. The solution is not to tax these people. The solution is to make the playing field level. Yeah. Right?
And let's talk about that, right? So it's massive wealth redistribution via currency debasement. Yes. So lower and middle classes get impacted the most because they don't have the means to save in assets. Right. And the wealth is...
Or borrow cheaply.
And the wealth is redistributed back to the government and back to the very wealthy that do have the means to save in assets.
Correct.
And that's what's causing the wealth inequality. Yeah, absolutely. Now, from a historical standpoint, every time that wealth inequality reaches a certain point, something breaks.
You think it's 1789?
So we have two.
Bring out the guillotine?
We had the French Revolution, which is, I believe, a little bit more of a left-wing revolution. And then we had the American Revolution, which is a little bit more of a right-wing revolution. Now, the question is, which way do we go?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of questions there. But the fact is that, the Russian Revolution as well, similar thing. The fact is that, when a society gets this broken, bad things can happen and it can go the wrong way. Look, the left would love to, just tax the hell out of everybody and issue universal basic income and make us all live at the same level. And that's not right either, because it doesn't provide the right incentives for people to work hard and to reward, good behavior. The thing that I find so sad is that capitalism is a system for bestowing great prosperity on mankind. And if you study capitalism from 1789 to 1913, you look at my grandparents' life, you know, from 1913 even to 1970, you look at how much living standards and, you know, health and equality, I mean, it was just so fantastic in a solid capitalist system. I mean, you know, and I talk about, everyone says, well, deflation's a bad thing. I mean, we had deflation all throughout the 19th century, and yet people got richer and people got wealthier and lives got better, and the average man could afford a much better life. And now it's the other way around. I mean, we're seeing, you know, for the first time in a long time, you know, lifespans in America are starting to shorten.
Yep.
You know, which is a sign that the society, something's not right.
Yeah, and that's also something that you mentioned in the book as well, Larry, is that you mentioned that it summarizes itself. Money printing breaks everything.
Everything.
And one of the things that you mentioned was health.
Absolutely.
Could you explain why that is?
Well, yeah, I mean, because poor people can't buy good food, and because poor people are working 3 jobs, you know, and not getting a good night's sleep to try and put money on the table, and because, you know, we've got big agra and big, you know, I mean, you know, why do we have Roundup here? I mean, Roundup is a herbicide that makes all our bread somewhat poisoned. You know, Roundup is banned in Europe, but Monsanto's got so much power in the United States that Roundup has not been banned here. I mean, this is why I have so much help for RFK Jr.,
Yep.
you know, and his ability to, you know, I mean, we were propagandized. I mean, we were told we should eat margarine, not butter. That's wrong. I mean, Ansel Keys was a person at Harvard that basically was paid by the food companies to lie. We had this whole food pyramid. You're supposed to eat a bunch of carbs. No, you're not. You're supposed to eat a bunch of meat. You know, I mean, read anything about read the carnivore code, which I just read. I mean, humankind, we evolved to be who we are because millions of years ago, one of our ancestors started figuring out how to cook and eat meat, and our brains got a lot bigger than chimpanzee brains.
Yeah.
And so we became humans. And, you know, the human machine was meant to be fed meat, period.
Absolutely.
But you know, most people don't know that, and there's just been a lot of bad behavior and bad thought patterns. I mean, you know, the healthcare system is just horribly broken. And when Obamacare tripled everyone's, you know, it's just everything in America has become, you know, a money grab and grift. Everything. My dog was sick recently. I took him to a vet clinic. The vet clinic was owned by a PE firm. You know, the PE firm, they convinced me that by doing a bunch of expensive shit, they could save the dog. The dog was toast. I mean, it was sad, but the dog was dead. He was going to die, no matter what. I found that out later. But you know what? They managed to extract thousands and thousands of dollars out of me trying to keep the dog alive because we love the dog. Yeah. Right? I mean, Susie Buds, who's a big Bitcoiner, she was in the dental business. She said these dental practices they're getting bought up by PE firms, and the PE firms are saying, hey, it's pretty easy to just nick that cavity a little bit, and suddenly a cavity becomes a root canal, and you make 3 times as much money. Why don't you guys do that? So, you know, advice to everybody listening, make sure your dentist is an independent, honest practitioner, not part of a PE firm-owned dental practice where they have an incentive to actually make you sicker so they can charge you more money. I mean, that's the kind of sick shit that's happening. Yeah. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's absolutely horrible.
You know, and it reminds me of the whole architecture of fiat, and something that I really appreciate about Bitcoin is Bitcoin is an aligned incentive structure system. Yes. So you're holding Bitcoin, Michael Saylor's holding Bitcoin, I'm holding Bitcoin, and we're all talking about Bitcoin, but we're all benefiting from Bitcoin going up.
We're all on the same team.
And the pleb that's holding 0.01 BTC from a percentage basis, he's benefiting just as much as all of us.
You know, you're working for me, Michael Saylor's working for me, Jeff Booth and Lynn, everybody in Bitcoin is working for everybody else in Bitcoin, and nobody has an unfair advantage because it's a mathematical protocol. And it's fair. That's important. It's fair. Nobody has an unfair advantage. And it took a mathematical protocol and technology to create a monetary system that was fair. And that's why it's such a revolution.
And that's why it's sound money.
Exactly.
Because it's fair.
Because it's fair.
Yes. And it doesn't matter if you're the king, president, emperor, you cannot create more of it. Nope. If you want to create more of it, you have to get in line, pay for the costs, mine it like everybody else
or provide a good or service that costs somebody else to sell you their Bitcoin for that good or service. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, I have a bit of a rabbit hole question for you, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and a lot of modern day politics are based on this idea of equality.
Yes.
I think in Mother Nature, equality is just people are not equal, right? There's things that you're good at, there's things that I'm good at,
right?
And
we all have God-given gifts and limitations. Yes.
Correct. Right. Some people could play basketball, some people can't play basketball, but the a lot of modern politics is based on this idea of equality. And the way that they reach equality is via wealth redistribution.
Right.
There's two mechanisms. There's direct taxation. There's only so much you could do there. And then there is taxation via currency debasement.
Right.
Now, the rabbit hole question that I have for you is, does the modern left need the money printer to be a viable political philosophy?
I think they do. I think they absolutely do, because they buy votes effectively. They buy votes. And I think it's very important that there are people who strive for economic equality. And there will never be total economic equality, as you point out. Some people are more gifted, they contribute more, they earn more. But what you can get, in my belief, in an economic system, is you can get economic fairness, where the playing field is level. The referee is fair. The referee is not saying, oh yeah, you're Bill Ackman, when your bank fails, we'll bail you out and cover your ass. Oh yeah, you're Joe, lunch bucket, working average American. Sorry, tough shit for you. You get over leveraged in the housing bubble that we blew. You can't make the payments. We're taking your house. And BlackRock's going to own it, right? So, it's a fair system that we're going after, not an equal system, But I think most people understand that, because they recognize that, give me a fair game, I'll play as hard as I can. If somebody wants something for nothing, that's like saying they want to steal.
Yeah.
They want somebody else's labor, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
By definition.
And I think also when you say fairness, that includes social mobility, which
Yes,
I think
absolutely, all the way across.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no. I mean, that was what the American Revolution was fought about. That there is no royalty.
Yeah.
That we're all, we are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, a life, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. I mean, that's some of the greatest words ever written, and that's the premise of America. It's what made America great, and America still is great, but we've slipped from that.
Yeah.
We've let this disease get into our monetary system, and man, oh man, I mean, it's like cancer. I mean, as Ron Paul says, if we end the Fed, what are you going to replace it with? And he says, well, if you cut out a cancer, what do you replace it with? The answer is nothing. Sound money.
Need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledin has been the trusted choice for Bitcoin-backed lending, with transparency, security, and trust at their core. I absolutely love these guys, and I personally have not only an account with them, but also a loan. And some of the key features that I love about Ledin is the fact that there are no monthly payments. You pay at the end of the term. You also have the ability to roll over the loan as well, and you can pay it back whenever you want. Essentially, what they do is that they help their clients unlock the liquidity of their BTC, allowing you to hodl while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. They've been battle tested with their focus on transparency, security, and trust, allowing them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn more about what your BTC can do for you. Check out ledin.io today.
Larry, you're a very successful guy, right?
I've had ups and downs.
You have very impressive, credentials.
Well, I went to good schools.
You went to Harvard, I believe.
Yeah, Harvard Business School.
What motivates you to write this book at 67 years old?
Yeah.
You've succeeded in life. You've traveled the world. You're going to the biggest Bitcoin conferences.
Yeah.
You're going to Michael Saylor's 100K party. You're talking to the brightest minds in the world. What motivates you?
My grandmother's voice in the back of my head.
That's very powerful. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Just saying, do what's right.
Okay.
Just saying, give back and do what's right. She was deeply religious, and I've been given these gifts. The education, the intelligence, growing up in a upper middle class family. I've seen how broken this is, and I've seen people hurting from it. And I thought, someday I'll be dead. I want my kids and my grandkids to say, hey, that guy did it right.
That's very powerful. Wow. I gotta take a moment here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No.
I don't generally get emotional, but you kind of hit a hot button for me.
Yeah, it's wow. So let's talk a little bit about the middle class upbringing, because I think that's something that has completely been gutted because of essentially the fiat system. How will Bitcoin bring that back?
Well, it'll create fairness across the board. People won't have to worry about money. People will be able to retire again. It's just going to be a fair world. It's going to be a better world. We're all going to benefit from this technology. There's so many great things happening in the world, Nico. I mean, think about what technology has done. I mean, think about all the benefits we've had. Think about how TVs and, I was saying earlier today, I remember being in college as a freshman and long distance calls were expensive. So I got to talk to my parents once every week for 5 minutes because, that was all I wanted to spend on long distance phone calls. Well, look at phone calls now are effectively free anywhere in the world, right? This is the benefit of technology. That's coming to all of us. So all of our lives are going to get much better as a result of the technical innovations that we're seeing right now, okay? But to make sure they're fairly distributed, we got to have a fair system, or else the guys at the top are going to keep raking off, and, all of their piece. And benefiting at the expense of the rest of us. And that's what's going on
Absolutely.
now. So, I mean, I know, and I think you feel this way too. And if you talk to Bitcoiners, I mean, I'm so hopeful and so optimistic and so positive. I mean, I watched my dad retire with some money, not a lot, some money. By the time he passed, he was down, it had whittled, its purchasing power was gone. I mean, I have 80-year-old friends, 70 and 80-year-old friends who are still doing work. They have money, they have their houses paid for, and they have savings. And they're like, well, I don't know how long I'm going to live, and I might run out of money, given how inflation is eating me up, right? So you can't really retire in this system safely. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, just having that, just knowing that your purchasing power was going to be preserved, it's a very powerful thing.
Do you think, Larry, do you think that, because you've identified one of the things that I appreciate about the gold bugs, right, and the whole gold movement is that you guys really started this, the whole idea of sound money.
Yeah.
And you guys really identified the problems very accurately. Where do you think gold came up short?
So politically, they figured out how to neuter it. I mean, right?
How did they do that exactly?
Well, paper gold, going off the gold standard, fractional reserve banking. I mean, it's a long litany of tales. A lot of it's laid out in the book, though, so you'll get a picture of how they did it. But gold failed. I mean, it's hard to verify, it's hard to transfer, it's heavy. You can cover tungsten and gold. I mean, there've been fake gold bars. It just didn't work. And we moved to a system of ledgers and credits, and we moved to a fractional reserve banking system that basically allowed the banks to create money at will. And so what happened is they got way ahead of the gold supply, and the money effectively became unsound. Now, Lynn would argue that had to happen at an engineering level no matter what, and she may be right. I would argue that there were places where politics intervened and shoved it ahead, the biggest one being 71. I mean, Nixon had it. I mean, a lot of people say, well, Nixon had to do what he did, and that's not true. Nixon could have let the gold price float. We would have had gold as a neutral reserve currency, and we would not have had the inflation that we've now had. We would not, we could have maintained Glass-Steagall as an example, and the banks wouldn't have been able to pull off 2008 the way they did.
Yeah.
I mean, so there were two pieces to it. There was politics, and then there was some of just the development of technology that kind of left gold in the dust. I mean, once the telegraph got developed, I mean, before that, gold was shipped overseas. I mean, the Pony Express originally, watch Butch Cassidy. I mean, they were blowing up the trains that carried the gold with the payroll. Do you know what I mean? I mean, gold was money, and you had to move it around for final settlement. Well, you had a telegraph, and suddenly you could start keeping a ledger. So a lot of reasons gold failed, but it did fail, and the failure accelerated a lot with the futures and with actually with Bill Clinton and Rubin and Larry Summers. There was an article a paper that Summers published called something's paradox, Gibson's paradox. So in order to get reelected, Clinton figured out that if they could mask the price of gold going up, they could create inflation and not have it look inflationary. The bond vigilantes wouldn't know what was going on. And so Rubin, who was an ex-gold trader at Goldman Sachs, figured out how to create a lot of paper gold. And so, right now, and what's going on as we speak is that the LBMA is having trouble making deliveries, which would maybe argue that we're close to the point at which the LBMA blows up. And that's because those of us in the gold camp know this. We believe there are as many as 100 paper claims for an ounce of gold for every ounce that really exists.
That's
right?
crazy.
So think about that. That's a game of musical chairs where if everyone with a paper claim came and said, hey,
I'll take it.
I'll take the ounces, please. Thank you very much. The ounces wouldn't be there. Not at today's.
Instead of a bank run, it's a gold run.
It's a gold run. Yeah, and just to give you a sense of how much fiat we've created, there's another good chart in the book done by my friend Brent Santiago, a really great chart. So there was a time in the 70s when you could actually take the U.S. money supply and you could divide it by the 261 million ounces of gold that we theoretically own, and you came up with a $35 reference price. That was true back then. If you did that same calculation, I've said this many times, if you did that same calculation today, took all of the money supply outstanding today, divided it by those 200, gold would need to be at $89,000 an ounce. Okay, gold's at, $2,900 right now. So it's a long ways away. The point there is we've created a lot of paper gold.
Absolutely. And it's also, its physical characteristics make it very difficult for you to withdraw.
It's hard. I mean, you and I don't trade in gold anymore. I mean, it's pretty and it'll eventually.
I have to admit though, and I'm a millennial, I do own gold bars.
Good for you.
And they feel really good in your hand.
Attaboy. I got a bunch of coins and I got a bunch of silver coins. Silver has a lot of utility. Its stock to flow sucks and it hasn't gone up as much as gold and it's being demonetized. But I tell you where silver in a mandible scenario, silver would be very valuable because most people know what a 1 ounce silver coin is worth. It's $30. And so, there's a couple of chickens or some eggs or maybe a tank of gasoline or whatever. Yeah. I mean, if the credit cards aren't working, I'm guessing there'll be people who, farmers and others who will say, yeah, you can pay me in silver.
Absolutely.
I'll take it.
100%. Does Bitcoin replace gold? Do you see it reaching the market cap of gold? Do you see it reaching the market cap of gold very quickly?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's actually arguably a lot closer than people think. So the market cap of gold right now is about $18 billion. The market cap of Bitcoin is about $1 trillion. My market cap of Bitcoin, as we know, is about 2 trillion, round numbers. But if you think about 18 trillion of gold, really only about a quarter to a third of it is in bars and coins that you and I can buy. So about a quarter of it's in antiques and in museums and antiquities. So, we're not going to go melt down the gold in the British Museum, right? It's staying there. About a quarter of it's sitting in central banks. Actually, a little less than a quarter. And then the balance is around women's necks in in India and China and here. I mean, it's jewelry. And by the way, if it gets high enough, I mean, you're going to see women, selling their gold jewelry. I mean, $89,000 an ounce. I'm guessing there's some bracelets that'll get turned in.
Absolutely.
But so my point is that to flip gold, let's say the investable gold is 4 to 6 trillion, and the investable Bitcoin right now is, 2 trillion, maybe 3x from here, and Bitcoin is kind of flipping the investable gold, right? Interesting numbers.
Absolutely. At the time of recording, the Bitcoin price is roughly at 100K.
Right.
I think a lot of people were anticipating it for it to be a lot higher by now.
Yeah,
people are talking about diminishing returns. They're saying the cycles. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, it's doing just what it should be doing. It's just marching up relentlessly. The drawbacks are slow. We were at the 58K club for a while. We went to 100. It's a nice move of, 42 grand. We're now building up what in technical investing analysis they call a flag between kind of 90 and 106. Okay, let's add another 42 to that. I think the next stop is at 140. I mean, to me, these flags with moves, this is very good, healthy, constructive development. When we go from, let's call it 140 to 250 really fast, which might happen, my sense is it's going to be ahead of itself. Okay. And that's when you might, I don't know what the top of this cycle is. I mean, I look at a lot of things, including the power law and historical cycles and how far it comes off the base. Feels to me like the top of the cycle is between 200 and 300, and then we'll have a pullback. But I think the pullbacks are getting smaller. And I think at some point, this power law model is going to break to the upside, and we're not going to have pullbacks because at that point, this is Parker Lewis's, the gradually and then suddenly. I mean, the suddenly phase, Saylor made this point when I was on stage with him in Madeira, and he said, look, I can see what's going to happen. We're going to go to 300. A lot of people think, holy shit, this has been amazing. I'm selling now. That's going to be a mistake. And it's going to go to 700 and a million. They're not going to be able to get back in.
Yeah.
So
they're not going to be able to get the same amount of coins.
No, I mean, I think generally speaking, my view is you sell coins, don't count on getting them back.
Yeah. This cycle hasn't really started. The bull part of this cycle has started, but the euphoria phase of this cycle hasn't started yet.
I completely agree. And I think it comes in the next year. I think between, we're talking now, it's February. I think between now and February, March of next year, they're going to be fireworks.
Yeah.
Real fireworks.
I completely agree. Now, I have a question from you, and I'm going to pose as a Keynesian economist. Yeah. If there isn't inflation, won't people just hoard money?
Yeah, that's bullshit, and I deal with it in the book. I mean, do you not eat because there's, if you think steak's going to be cheaper in the future, you're going to stop eating, waiting for, okay, we all know your TV 5 years from now will be cheaper than a TV today. You're going to stop buying TVs? No, you want to watch football today, you're going to buy one. It's all just horse shit. I mean, you might stop buying frivolous shit You might stop wasting your money on gambling and doing other things to try and beat inflation. But humans have needs, and you're going to pay good value for things you need. And so the notion, this idea of a savings glut, I mean, this is all just Keynes. This is all just to support their system. It's a lie. It's just a total lie. Deflation is good. Deflation means that you can buy more with less dollars. I mean, look at the people from 1870 to 1913. Their lives improved incredibly. I mean, they went from, outhouses to indoor plumbing. They had no electricity. A lot of them by, the 20s and 30s, they had electricity. They were eating better food. They, Sears Roebuck came out with a catalog. They could buy high quality goods. I mean, all of it. And during that time frame, prices were falling. But GDP and output, I mean, the whole idea of measuring output by GDP growth and then having that, somehow we've got to get to a measure of output that's based on units, not on dollars. Because, if you're understating inflation and you say you got 3% GDP growth, but you've got 5%, you really have 5% inflation. Well, in fact, you're actually in a recession. It's not like the dollar value of cars that we're selling, it's how many cars are we selling? It's the number of units. So unit growth is what suggests that an economy is benefiting, not dollar value growth. Right?
And then my next question, which you partly answered, which is, can money exist without inflation?
Of course it can. Oh, of course it can. It has. I mean, to a degree. I mean, gold always had a certain amount of inflation, but absolutely. Abso-friggin-lutely. Anyone who says it can't is wrong.
How will people deal with wages, for example?
Well, I mean, wages will get set in the marketplace. The fact that your wage doesn't go up will be okay because you'll have the same wage, but it'll buy more in the future, and you'll look forward to that. And it will shift everyone's time preference. You will start thinking about, how do I buy things that last, and how do I save for the future, and how you'll know that you have an alternative and a reward for being patient and for not wasting money on stupid shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a total mind shift.
It's a total mind shift. I mean, Keynes has a nice quote in the book where he says, somewhere we shifted from valuing honesty and hard work to valuing consumption and consumerism. I mean, I can foresee a time where owning a really snazzy car would just become, viewed as being just like a person's stupid. Why would they ever do that? You don't need that. It doesn't benefit them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think, and you'll want to buy things that last.
I mean, you see this in Bitcoin culture.
Yeah.
We all live below our means.
Exactly.
We try to spend as little money.
It affects everything. It affects art. I mean, look at the buildings that were built pre-war in America.
Yeah.
They're still standing and they're beautiful. Some of the architecture is beautiful. Look at the buildings we're building today.
Yeah.
They're cheap. They're schlocky. They fall down. They don't last.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it'll change everything. It'll change the mindset to one of thinking about the long term. I mean, one of the terrible things that Keynes said was, in the long term, we're all dead, which is kind of like a party on, Garth. Screw the seed corn, screw your relatives.
Yeah.
And in fact, the right way society should work is for parents and families to want their relatives to be better off them, to want to save, to invest in their education, to invest in giving them a legacy, to invest in giving them a future. That's what's good, not partying and leaving them nothing but debt and what we've left people now.
Of course, fast times, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you something, Larry.
Yeah.
Another part of your book, right, where you brought up America's moral decline.
Yes.
What came first? Was it the money experiment that led to the moral? Because if you look at history and you look at the Roman Empire, there's a lot of similarities.
They track really perfectly, don't they? Yeah.
So what came first?
Man, that's a chicken and egg question. You know what I'm saying?
Was it the degradation of the money? Because I think like what a lot of people forget to understand is that money plays such an integral part in the human experience.
Absolutely. Everyone touches it.
What happens when that money is broken? When that money is corrupt, you could make a very good argument that it breaks something spiritually about you as a human being.
That's what I believe. But I think the money breaks and then the spirit breaks. But that leads to, there's each incremental step, and the steps just got worse and worse and worse. And, like as an example, when we were on the gold standard, I mean, they suspended the specie payment in 1812. The money broke, but they fixed it and they got back on the gold standard, and, things were okay again. And we had a lot of experiences like that, including the Civil War, where they printed greenbacks. But, we kept going back to what we knew, which was sound money. And and the bimetallism wars were fought over that. All the free silver guys wanted less sound money. All the gold guys wanted sound money. And we stayed with sound money. But then, the Fed came along and it backstopped the banks. And then, and it just, the snowball got really, really rolling, later on. I mean, if you look at the history of America, I mean, the monetary system was never perfect, but it was better than it is now.
Absolutely.
By definition. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a very kind of interesting phenomenon. Like you can
they go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean it is chicken and egg. I mean, is it good? And it's kind of like each one of them is a top this. Do you know what I mean? I mean, derivatives, right? For example, I mean, Phil Gramm lobbied to change all the derivatives law, which allowed Enron to vaporize $78 billion worth of assets. Do you know what I mean? And she was on the Enron board, and she was getting paid, $1 million a year to sit on that board. I mean, it's just, again, insiders changing the rules, doing stuff to benefit themselves, breaking the money, right?
Yeah. So Larry, early on in the conversation, I want to double back to this. You talked about the debt doom loop.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the federal government's finances, right? The federal government collects taxes and the federal government has expenses. And some of those expenses are very much locked in. Social Security and Medicare are kind of set on autopilot and they adjust upward with CPI. Some of the are more discretionary, like defense, but frankly, it's pretty locked in as well because all the defense contractors have Washington by the throat. Basically, these things are costs that we endure. And by the way, one of the biggest wastes of federal spending, in my opinion, in the last 20 years was all the wars post 9/11. I mean, we wasted $8 trillion in the Middle East, securing oil, for other people and ourselves, and grabbing Afghanistan and giving it back. I mean, we just wasted $8 trillion. It's terrible. But Dick Cheney's rich. I mean, he made $100 billion, in Halliburton. So set all that aside. The federal government balances these two, and when COVID came along, the expenses went up a great deal, and revenue didn't. And so the deficits really widened out. And one would have thought the crisis was over, they'd cut back the expenses, but they didn't. And so we started running bigger deficits. Well, as you know, when you run a deficit, it has to be financed. The government has to figure out a way to pay for the deficit. So what do? They issue debt in order to have the cash to make the expense payments that they're making. So that debt gets added on to the national debt, which has been growing incredibly quickly, as we all know. And that debt needs to be serviced. There's an interest cost to that debt. And so the bond market, which buys that debt, pays that interest. And the bond market is comprised of savers who want to buy debt to get an interest rate. They're trying to conservatively save money and get interest on it. And so what happens is, as the debt gets bigger and interest rates go up, the interest cost of the government goes up a lot. So the interest cost of the government 5 years ago was $400 billion a year. Right now we're running at $1.4 trillion a year. Well, last year the deficit was $1.8 trillion. So a big part of the deficit is the interest cost on the debt. If the deficit gets bigger, what do? You sell more debt. Okay, you sell the debt into a fixed size market. What happens? There are only so many buyers. They need a higher price interest cost in order to want to buy it. So the interest rate goes higher. So now you got $36 billion that's not just paying $1.4 trillion, maybe they're paying 1.8. Well, that's going to get added to the deficit. Well, how are you going to finance the deficit? You're going to issue more debt. Well, the more debt gets, and it becomes a doom loop, right? Bigger deficit, more debt issuance, higher interest rates, bigger deficit.
Can't stop this train. Nothing stops this train.
Right. And I got permission from Lynn to use that as a chapter. I mean, there's a chapter called Nothing Stops This Train, which was a brilliant meme, by Lynn Alden that describes that process. And so Doge comes along, and, rightly so, and I applaud all of their efforts. They are going to try, and they found some really stupid expenses. They're going to try, and they will cut expenses. But here's the thing, Nico. They've got a really, really hard task, okay? The deficit is 1.8 last year, and it's now running closer to like 2.4 if you annualize the last couple of months. What we're seeing is that's going to be really, really hard to cut, because 80%, if you take Social Security, Medicare, defense, and interest, you've accounted for 80% of the budget. So even if you if you cut the less, 20% to zero, which you can't, you wouldn't balance it. So you've got to go after, and you try and cut Social Security and Medicare, that's the third rail. No politician's going to go for that. Defense guys, they're pretty powerful, and the interest rates are really high. Now, what they could do is they could do financial repression, and I think that's what they're going to force to do. They're going to be forced to do yield curve control. The Fed, in spite of inflation not coming back to 2%, you've seen them already calling for this. Some people saying, well, it's in the book as well. Well, maybe we should have an inflation target of 3 or 4%. They're going to be forced to keep issuing the debt and hold the interest rate below the neutral rate. And that interest rate will at least bring that 1.4 of interest expense down, and that'll help a little bit. But the point is, yield curve control. How do they do that? That means they are buying the debt themselves, which then means their balance sheet is getting bigger, which then means the supply of money in the system is getting bigger. And what's that? That's inflation, okay? As inflation gets bigger, the bond market is devised to give a return over and above inflation. Higher inflation, the bond market says, I'm sorry, I'm not buying that unless you give me this rate. Eventually, the Fed could be sitting there with their balance sheet saying, well, we're going to cap the yields at 4%. The entire bond market could look at it and go, 4%? I don't like that. Sold to you, right? And $36 trillion.
Yeah.
They could sell to the Fed, which has got a $7 trillion balance sheet, right? So suddenly you've just grown the money supply by that amount. That's hyperinflation.
But something's got to give.
Something's got to give.
Something's got to give.
Something's got to
But
give.
you just can't put a timeline on it.
No, you can't. You don't know how it's going to give. You don't know the form it's going to take. But what we do know, Nico, is it's leading to the big print. There's no other way out. And that's why I wrote the book, because I want to get up on a soapbox and scream at the entire goddamn world. Wake up, guys. Wake up. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
Protect yourself now.
Yeah.
Because there's not going to be a do-over.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you're in Bitcoin, the big print is going to make...
We're going to $1 million a coin.
Yeah.
Gold's going to 10,000.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nuts.
What do you think about Lummis? I was talking to her.
Yeah,
she's talking to Senator Lummis about 2 weeks ago in D.C. What do you think about her plan in the Bitcoin Act, the bill?
Yeah.
And I love the way that Senator Lummis approached it. She's like, look, my generation kind of really screwed you guys over.
We fucked it up. Oh, there's no doubt. I agree with that totally.
And I'm not saying her specifically.
No,
but,
she didn't do it. I didn't do it either. But yeah.
And
there's no
she's like,
doubt.
I want it, like, this bill is a way to rectify that. And she was making
this book is my way of rectifying.
There we go.
Right.
Perfect.
Right. I mean, it's like I want to,
And the case that she was making is that if the Bitcoin Act gets passed in the United States, which is going to be kind of hard because the Republicans don't have a filibuster majority proof in the Senate. They have 53 votes.
Right.
Right. She's making the case that by the United States buying, I think, up to 1 million Bitcoin, you're like 5%.
Yeah, it was 200,000 a year for 5 years, as I remember. Yeah.
She can use, or better said, the U.S. government could use that to pay off some of the debt. Do you think that's feasible?
Yes, I do. It's complicated, but I do think it's feasible. I mean, I think we need a monetary reset. Full stop. Okay, we are in a sovereign debt crisis. There's too much debt. There's not enough GDP. We need a monetary reset. Okay, how that takes form, this is brain surgery. This is complicated. Okay, and I don't have the answer, and I don't think anybody has the answer. But what it does mean is it means you've got to go back to some form of sound money as the base layer. Bitcoin is the right choice. Gold is inferior, but it's a better choice than fiat. Okay, and yes, if we start buying Bitcoin, that's going to shove the dollar down. Okay, which we need. That would create more exports for us, and it would make our imports more expensive. It would harm China, but that's a good thing. China's taking advantage of our industrial Midwest. And yes, I mean, what she's talking about is brilliant. I think Trump and Debasement kind of understand this. Okay, now in the paths, I mean, there are a million paths as to how we get there. Okay, and I don't know, and I can't foresee. But when I invest, I don't invest. I'm not a trader. I don't invest month by month. I invest year by year, and I really invest 5 years by 5 years and decade by decade. And so I'm looking to protect my savings, for when I'm 80 or 90 or for my kids and stuff. And I just know that all roads lead to inflation.
Yeah,
they all lead. And so
they have to print. Nothing stops this train.
Right. And so in what form or manner, I don't know. And by the way, it's going to be volatile. I mean, there's a chart in here. There's Dan Oliver's brilliant, Weimar chart that shows the price of gold monthly during the Weimar hyperinflation. I mean, example, we could have an enormous stock market crash. Okay, there's some people think that they're going to engineer that to hurt Trump. Okay, we could have an enormous stock market crash. And in 2020, when the stock market crashed, Bitcoin got hit hard, gold got hit hard. Right? Powell came in on a Monday morning and said, we're going to print until our eyes bleed, basically. And gold took off like a rocket. Bitcoin took off like a rocket. But, if you panicked on that downturn, you got blown out. So one needs, and I try in the book to explain that, one needs to understand the nature of these assets and understand that, and you've been in this long enough, I've been in it long enough, I know this stuff can go against you.
Yeah.
I own a bunch of these things. I bought them at 17,000 in 2017, and I watched them go to 10, and I watched them go to 4.
Yep. And I bought one at 69K at 21 in 21.
I did too.
And it was terrible.
I did too. I did too. But you know what? I bought more at 15. In 22 when after SBF. So you got to take a long-term perspective. I mean, the changing of a monetary system, which is what we're in, it's going to be a volatile event.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do want to give massive kudos to Senator Lummis.
Oh, absolutely.
She is like
Absolutely.
she gave me hope. You know,
Absolutely.
She gave me hope, and what
you know
she's
what?
doing is incredible.
Yeah, and Thomas Massey, I mean, these are forerunners, and there will be more, you know.
There will be more. I love that.
There will be, and it's like we're coming.
I love that.
There are going to be more, right?
You know, you're talking about investing earlier, Larry, and I think, you know, the world is waking up to Bitcoin.
Right.
TradFi's here.
Right.
You know, the world is woken up to this. Nation states are here. If you were to give advice to your client in terms of what should be the appropriate Bitcoin allocation, percentage terms, what would it be?
Depends on your age and depends on your risk tolerance. I said in the book, I thought if you didn't have at least 25% of your assets in sound money, you were going to experience regret. I obviously have a lot more than that, and I think a lot of people should have more than that. If you're older and you can't handle a drawdown, you might need the money within a 5-year window. Having 100% in Bitcoin, that doesn't make any sense. You could have a big drawdown and you'd have to pull it out at a low value. You want to do that. So it kind of depends on when are you going to need the money, right? So I think everybody has to figure that out for themselves. But let me make another point about the whole thing that I think is a very important point to make, and the book makes it, but I want to make it here because I think it's very important people understand. It was funny, you know, when you write one of these books, you do research and you learn things and things pop into your head that you hadn't thought of before. Investing, you know, and so there are a lot of rules of investing. They're tried and true. They've been around a long time. There are a lot of great books written. Graham and Dodd, you know, they're brilliant. There are thousands of brilliant investors, millions of brilliant investors who've done well over the years. And it's very seldom that the rules change, but the rules have changed. And let me describe that. The rules have changed in the following way, Nico. We now have investments dominated by Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law says that the network grows in value at the square of the underlying number of users. So I was trained, you know, at business school to invest in things based on multiples of cash flow and growth and PEG ratios and all the standard stuff, Sharpe ratios, all that stuff. And therefore, when the internet came along, and I invested in the internet, and I benefited from the growth of that, but like I was looking at Amazon and I was looking at Facebook and I was looking at Google, and I could never get past the valuations. I put valuation tests on these network businesses. I said, they're too expensive for what they are. They don't have enough profits to justify this valuation. I missed it, okay? Here's what happened. Amazon, since its IPO, is up 218,000%.
Yeah.
Google, since its IPO, is up 9,000%. Facebook, since its IPO, is up like 2,000%. General Motors, since its IPO in 1916, is up like 400 times, okay? It's great. It was a great investment, okay? If you held GM through all those years, you did fine. My point is, it's only 20 years the internet's really been active since, right? In 20 years, because I consider the broad internet usage was 2000. It started in 95, but broadly it was 2000. So we're 24 years into the internet, and you've got network businesses that have gone up thousands of percent.
Yeah.
This is different.
Yeah.
This is a really different set of rules, okay?
Yeah. That trend isn't going to stop.
No.
Yeah.
So what does that tell me? I want to invest in network businesses. Well, or network things, right? What's the biggest network thing right now? Jesus Christ.
It's obvious.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so obvious, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's very important for people to get out of that traditional investing mindset and think in those terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Final question for you.
Yeah, what's that?
What are you the most excited about for the next 5 years in terms of Bitcoin?
Well, I'm really excited to see all of us winning. And I'm excited to see Bitcoiners winning, and I'm excited to see new people coming into the fold. And, you know, I've told some stories. I mean, I was in a Whole Foods in Framingham, Mass. in December. I was walking around. There was a guy in northeastern Massachusetts. There's a office supply store called WB Mason. They deliver. They have trucks. There's a guy in there walking around with a WB Mason uniform on. So he's a delivery man. Walks up to me and says, "Are you Larry?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "Dude, I've been watching your videos for 5 years. I started stacking 5 years ago. I got a pretty good stack." He gives me a big hug. He says, "You changed my life. You saved my life." It's the guy who drives a truck.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm kind of like, oh man, we need more stories like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
I want that story repeated 1,000 times.
I love that.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm helpful for. The other thing I would say that my biggest and longer term, my biggest hope for Bitcoin is that it ends the wars.
Yes.
It's just people innocent people in faraway countries have gotten killed for no good reason.
Fix the money, fix the world.
Fix the world.
Guys, go get Larry's book, The Big Print, What Happened to America and How Sound Money Will Fix It. Larry, this has been an absolute honor.
Oh, well, no, it's
Thank
my
you so
honor
much.
to sit with you. I really enjoyed it, Nico.
Appreciate
Great
it.
questions. Yeah.
Thank you.